In this video, we're going to look at how we create blocks and apply attributes. In Autocad, a block is a collection of objects combined into a single named object. A block can be a realistic representation of an object or a simple symbol, such as a symbol in an electrical schematic. Blocks can be stored locally or globally. In this particular example, we'll be creating global blocks, which are external files, and we'll be using attributes. Local blocks can be available in the actual drawing itself, so you can create a block and store it in that particular drawing file. You can also use the blocks palette to access blocks and other drawings to bring them into your current drawing as well. You can use block attributes to store information about the objects included in the block. An attribute is a label or tag that attaches data to a block. Attributes can include information such as manufacturer, part number, fire rating, description, etc. You can view a summary of the information for all the blocks in a drawing using the Block Attribute Manager or Batman command, and we'll cover that in the video. The best thing about attributes is they can be easily modified and updated in the blocks. Autocad also allows you to create tool palettes that link to your blocks to make it easier to access and use the desired block content. If you use a tool palette to access your blocks, it's important to understand that the palette is linked to those external block files as well. If those files are moved or deleted, the block tools on the palette will no longer work. For this reason, many users prefer to use the Design Center in Autocad. They use Design Center to bring the blocks into their active drawing. You can also use the blocks palette in newer versions of Autocad as well. It performs in a similar way to Design Center. In this drawing, I have an electronic control panel schematic, and I want to create a block for the relay in the drawing. I want to define three attributes: the reference designator, the manufacturer, and the manufacturer part number. I don't need the manufacturer and manufacturer part number to be visible, so I'm going to make those into invisible block attributes. Invisible block attributes don't show on the drawing but are attached to the block, and they can be extracted just like any other attribute in an Autocad drawing. So if you're utilizing something like data extraction, the information will come through from the block even though they are invisible attributes. Now what we're going to do is convert the relay geometry into a block along with these attributes, but what I've done is I've added this extra vertical line here, and that's going to allow me to place the attributes neatly and tidily vertically down that line so that they're all in one place with the block. So I'm going to start by defining the attributes. Now the attribute tool is located on the Insert tab here on the ribbon. And if you go to the block definition panel, you've got define attributes here. Now just before we do that, I'm just going to jump back to the home tab. You'll notice I'm on the layer 0 for all of this. One of the tricks with Autocad blocks is if you create a block on the layer 0, it will adopt the current drafting layer when you insert that block into any Autocad drawing. So if you create all your blocks and your attributes on layer 0, when you bring that block in with its attributes, it will automatically adopt the current drafting layer. So let's jump over to the Insert tab again. There's Define Attributes. Now as soon as I do that, it will bring up the Attribute Definition dialog box. Now you'll notice you've got various modes available, as you can see there, for your attributes. I'm going to create my first attribute. Now my first attribute is going to be the reference designator. Now you can't use spaces in the tag name, so I'm going to put ref and underscore design, so reference designator. The prompt, however, what I'm going to put here is in essence a question. And what I always do here is put this in like this, reference designator question mark, because then it's prompting you to put a value in there. So my reference designator for this will be just a default of R1. And I always put a default value in just to make sure there's something there as an attribute. Now I'm going to set the justification up as middle center, like so. And the text style, I'm just using the standard text style in this drawing. The text height, I'm going to set it to 1 unit, like so. Now this all depends on the units you're using in your drawing and your units of measurement. But in this particular case, the text height is 1 unit high, and I'm going to leave the rotation at 0. I'm also going over here to do an insertion point by specifying it on the screen. That way I can pick a point where my attribute's going to go. If you leave that switched off, it'll automatically put it at the 0, 0, which explains sometimes when you insert an attribute you can't find it. So make sure that you specify on screen like so. So let's click on OK, and there's our ref design attribute tag. Now I'm going to use the nearest snap just to place this on my line. So I'm going to do a shift and a right click, and I'm going to come down here to nearest and line that in approximately there and click, and you can see that sits nicely centered on that vertical line we've got here. So that's my first attribute tag in. Let's do the next one. So again, we can pop up to define attributes, or you can just right click and repeat @def, attribute definition. That'll bring up the dialog box as well. Now this time it needs to be an invisible attribute, like so. We need to tick that box. Make sure that the insertion point specify on screen is also ticked. Now the next tag that we're going to create is going to be MFR, manufacturer. So I'll pop that in like so, no spaces or anything like that required in this case. And again, I'm going to put the prompt in there, like that. And again, put a question mark. It's always good to have that question mark because it prompts people to put the value in. Now the manufacturer in this case is going to be Automation Direct. Like so, just to use a well-known manufacturer of relays. Justification, again, middle center. Text style standard. Text height, it's remembered this time to put the 1 in there for me, and I can align below a previous attribute definition with equal spacings. I'm not going to worry about that in this case because remember, these are invisible, so they won't actually show in the drawing anyway. So I click on OK. As you can see, there's manufacturer. Shift and right click to bring up your override snaps and utilize nearest, and we'll pop that, roughly speaking, there. And as you can see, that's lined in above the reference designator attribute tag. Last but not least, another right click and repeat attribute definition, like so. And again, this one will be invisible. Note it remembers the last setting, so always check your mode like that. Specify on screen is ticked, and then we put the tag in here. So what we need to look at now is our part number. So I'm going to put in there part_NO for part number as the tag. Remember, no spaces allowed. And this will be our part number. So part number question mark, like so. And then I'm going to put a default value in there of, say, R700. Could be a default part number from a catalog, for example. Justification will also be middle center again, like the previous two. Text style standard, text height 1. Remember, don't align below, otherwise it will go over the reference designator attribute tag. Click on OK. There it is there. Shift and right click again for our nearest snap, and we'll hover and we'll place that one there like so. So we've got part number, manufacturer and reference designator in place like so. It's now time to create our block in our Autocad drawing. And it's going to be a global block, so I'm going to write it to an external file which can then be placed on a server or emailed to people. It can also be stored in the cloud, for example. So what I need to do now is go to the block definition panel on the insert tab on the ribbon. And one thing I am going to do is delete the line here. We don't want that forming part of our block. So I'm just going to delete that first, and then it's up to block definition here. And we've got two options. We can create a block. That will create a block in this particular Autocad DWG file. But I want a global block, so I'm going to write the block to its own separate DWG file. So we go to write block like so, and we go to objects. Now we need to pick a base point for our block. We don't want it to be 0, 0, 0 in the X, Y and Z axes. We want to specify a point on the actual block itself. So we go to pick point, and I'm going to use the midpoint there on the base of the rectangle on the outside edge of our block. And then I need to select the objects that form our block. So I hit select objects like so. We obviously want our attribute tags, there's 3 of them that we set up earlier. And then if you just use a window selection by clicking here and then just dragging across like so to get all of the objects in the selection window, you then get all of the objects that are going to form our relay block. Press enter to confirm that, and you can see now that we've selected 45 objects in total. I'm going to convert those to a block automatically. I can retain the original objects or I can delete from the drawing. I don't want to do either of those. I want to convert to a block in the drawing. Now, because we're doing a global block using the write block command, we're creating what is commonly known as a W block and storing it in a known location. So we need to make sure that our file name and path is correct. I've preset this so it goes to a particular folder, but obviously you would click on this button here and you would go in and set it to whatever folder, whatever location you want it to go to. So I'm going to use this drawings folder here. This is the one that I'm using to record the video, and it's where I keep all of my DWG files. So I'm going to give the file a name, which is going to be relay R700, like so. And then just click on save. And as you can see now, the file name and path is set. You can insert the units. The units here are inches in this particular drawing, but it does depend obviously on what units you're using when you're creating your blocks. When I click on OK now, that has now created a block in the drawing. But as you can see, because it's got those attributes, that block, it's prompting me, and there's my question marks that I set up. There's my values that I set up for those attributes. So part number and manufacturer are invisible. You can't see them in the drawing. Reference designator R1, however, as you can see, is in the drawing. So when I OK that now, you can see that this is now a block reference, and you can see it's on layer 0, which has adopted the current drafting layer. If I go to the Home tab, you can see that 0 there is the current drafting layer. But that is now a block with its associated attributes. When we created our block, we made sure that 2 of the attributes in the block were invisible. Now what I can do is utilize a really useful command in Autocad to display those invisible attributes if I want to. So I can use the attribute display command, or @disp. Now I'm just going to type this in, ATTDISP, @disp. And you can see with the dynamic input it just pops up automatically, and on the suggestion menu there's only one command called @disp in Autocad. When I press enter now, I can enter my attribute visibility setting. Now if I set this to on, it will make sure that every single attribute in every single block becomes visible. As you can see, they appear on the screen like so. If I right click and repeat @disp and set it back to normal, that will actually set it to the settings that are in the block. So you can see they become invisible again. The 2 attributes that were invisible are now invisible again. Let's repeat that one more time. If I do that again and set it to off, it turns all the attributes off in the drawing. Right click, repeat @disp again and go to normal, and our R1 comes back, our visible attribute that we set previously. So that's a really useful tool if you want to see all of the invisible attributes in blocks in your drawing, but also more importantly, if you want to see the wood for the trees, you can actually turn off all the attributes as well, just so you've got a little bit of clarity there in your drawing. Now another thing you can do with your AutoCAD blocks is add them to a tool palette. Now in order to do this, you must save your drawing first. So you go up to save on the quick access toolbar, and that will do a quick save. It just means that the block definitions are saved to the DWG file that you're working in, your current drawing. So let's go to the View tab on the ribbon, and Tool Palettes is on the Palettes panel. And that'll open up the tool palettes like so. Now we're just going to create a simple new palette. So I'm going to right click on one of the tabs and I can go new palette like so. And that new palette is going to be our palette where we place our blocks. I'm going to call it the control palette. Like that. And there's the name of it there. If you want to move it up in the list, it's a right click, move up. And each time you can just move that up to the top. It's a good little bit of CAD practice to get into. Move it up like that because then it's always at the top of the list here on the tabs in the tool palettes. So what we can do now is we can literally just select our block, click on it, don't use the grip, the insertion point, but just click and hold over the block and drag and release when you're over the palette, and there's our Relay R700 block. Now the good thing is it's always going to be in that tool palette. It's available now for me to use in any drawing. And I can, if I right click here, export my tool palettes as well. So if I come down here, you can see all these different tool palettes and I can export these out. If I go to customize palettes, you'll notice here tool palettes like so. There's my control palette. I can right click and I can export and import palettes if I want to. So the tools are there to allow me to collaborate with others in a way that I can actually have these palettes stored in a central location. The tool palette refers to that central location and allows me to drag and drop these blocks into my drawing. I'm just going to move the tool palette right over. I'm going to click on the block itself and there's my block. It's literally a simple click on the palette. I can use the insertion point there and my block goes in. I'll change that reference designator there to R2 and I'll click on OK and there's R2 there. And I can repeat that now as many times as I like. So I'll just change the reference designator each time like so, click on OK, and we'll just fill these up like so. That'll become R4. I'll OK that one and I can just keep going until I've filled up my relay spaces in my schematic. And I'm just numbering those accordingly, obviously because you don't want them to have the same identification numbers each time. And as we come down, I can click there like so. Last one is R6 and I'll OK that like so. I can then close the tool palette and as you can see now we've got all of our relays in our electrical schematic and they're all blocks with the appropriate attributes. If I wanted to change any of my attribute definitions, I can use a tool called Batman. That's the Block Attribute Manager. So what I can do is I can type this in again using the dynamic input. It's BATT for block attribute, and you'll see the suggestion menu is already picking that out on the dynamic input there. It's BATT, block attribute, and then MAN for manager, Batman. So when I do that and press enter, you can see that the block attribute manager appears on the screen. Now it's a very simple little dialog box, but it's also very effective. You've also got here settings. Be aware that you can adjust the settings, the block attribute settings, things like prompt, default, height, rotation, and so on. So you can specify which block attribute settings you want to work with in the block attribute manager. I'll just click on cancel there. Now what we're going to look at is we're going to look at some of the properties of our attributes in our blocks. And I want to look at the reference designator, ref design here, like so. Now what we can do here is we can edit that particular block attribute. So when I click on edit here now, you can see it takes me into edit attribute. And all I'm going to do is go to properties and I want to change the color. So instead of by layer, I want it to be yellow so that it stands out. And if I move the dialog, can you see they're updating to yellow automatically? So it auto previews the changes there if that box is ticked, which is great because I can see what's going on as I work my way through the changes. I'll click on OK there. It takes me back to the block attribute manager, and all I've got to do now is click on OK, and that particular attribute change is now completed. It's a very, very useful tool to allow you to change the properties of your attributes, to highlight them, as we are in this case, in our drawing. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to delete R5 and R6. So just select those and hit the delete key on the keyboard. And what we're going to do, I'm going to show you some ways now to bring in blocks into your drawing. Now the good thing is we've used these blocks already in this particular drawing. So they are already in the DWG file, the current DWG file. So we're going to have a look at Design Center first. So make sure that we go to the View tab on the ribbon, into Palettes here, and there's Design Center there on the Palettes panel. And it will open up in a palette like so. Now you may find that it opens up in a sample drawing somewhere. You need to go to the Open Drawings tab up here. You can use Folders, Open Drawings. You can also look at the history of the drawings. And you can see there's one of the sample drawings that comes with Autocad that I've been using previously. But we want Open Drawings like so, and there's our drawing name there. If I go to Blocks here, you can see there's our Relay R700 block. What I'm going to do is make Design Center a little bit smaller. It's a bit big and taking up a lot of the screen right now. So let's just hover over a corner, as you can do with dialog boxes and palettes, click and drag, and there's our Relay R700 there. Just hit Escape if you do accidentally on purpose put a selection window in like I've done. Now, I can just click and drag and bring my block in like so. Very, very useful, very quick and easy, but the benefit I've got there is it doesn't have to be from this drawing. In my Open Drawings tab, I'm just going to cancel that there for the moment and undo that. In my Open Drawings tab here, I can have various drawings open and bring in blocks from other drawings from the Design Center as well, so it doesn't have to be your current drawing. And what I can also do is right click and insert block, and that'll bring up the insert dialog box where I can specify the insertion point, the scale and the rotation if I want to. So if I do it that way and click on OK, I can bring that in there like that, and I'll change that designator to R5 again like it was before. Click on OK, and as you can see we've utilized the Design Center there to bring that block in from our current open drawings. I'll close Design Center now, and I'm going to go back to the Insert tab on the ribbon. And what I want to show you now is the Blocks palette. Now in more recent versions of Autocad you have the Blocks palette, which also allows you to utilize things like the Library tab, where you can also create block libraries in a similar way that we did with Tool palettes. So let's just jump into our insert here. So it's the block panel on the Insert tab on the ribbon, and if I click here I want to go to Recent Blocks. And this will open up the Blocks palette. And as you can see, I've used lots of different blocks in the past. There's the relay, I've used a computer block, a chair, a tree, and so on. So those are all my most recent blocks that I've used, and I can bring those in from other drawings. I can also set favorite blocks if I want to, and that's where I can set up the block libraries in the Libraries tab there, and I've got content using the Blocks palette there, for example. So that's a folder that I've set up previously, and it's gone to a drawing called 254 content using the Blocks palette. So I'm going to go to current drawing, and there's the only block that I've got available. There's my Relay R700. And then what I can do is I can set up my insertion point, my scale, my rotation. I can repeat block placement so that I can then, instead of just inserting one block and having to insert another block, I can repeat the insertion of that block over and over again. And I can also explode the block if I want to into its component parts. So if I click on my relay now from the Blocks palette, it comes in a similar way as it came in from Design Center. I use the snap point, the midpoint snap there, change my reference designator to the R6 like it was before, click on OK, and I've now inserted a block from the Blocks palette as well. Just like Design Center, I can close the palette and my blocks are now inserted into my current drawing. There's a huge amount of things that you can do with blocks and attributes in your AutoCAD drawings. And what I've given you there is a whirlwind tour of blocks and attributes in AutoCAD. Invisible attributes can be useful, and to change the attribute display, don't forget you've got the @disp command. The Block Attribute Manager, or Batman, can also be really helpful to allow you to reorder your attributes or change the properties of your attributes in your blocks. Tool palettes can help you organize your blocks, make them easy to access and use for project collaboration, for example. So don't forget that tool palette command. It's an extremely useful one in your Autocad toolbox. Use the Design Center to access other drawings where blocks are stored. And also utilize the blocks palette for the same reason as well. The blocks palette makes that very easy as well. You might want to consider creating a central drawing where you store all your blocks in a single file to make it easy for you to locate and use your blocks library from a tool palette or potentially from the library tab on the blocks palette.
One of the more challenging problems many users have is understanding how to manage the layers in external references or XREFs. We're going to be inserting an XREF into a drawing using the bind option. Bind inserts an external reference into a drawing as a block, but maintains the layers. We can then use the Lay Merge tool to merge unneeded or duplicate layers. We're going to have more than one external reference in this drawing. If I go to my layer drop-down list, you can see that we have a lot of layers. You can tell which layers belong to an external reference because those layers have a bar symbol in their name. I'm going to attach a new external reference to this drawing. An external reference is basically another AutoCAD drawing that resides outside of the host drawing. When I attach an external drawing, I am overlaying it on top of the host drawing. You can use images, point clouds, and coordination models as overlays. PDFs and DWIFs can be used as underlays. I'm going to open the XREF Manager. I just type XREF. I currently have one external reference already in my file. I select Attach DWG to bring in another XREF. I select the Factory Lighting-M drawing. I click Open. I can bring the drawing in as an attachment or as an overlay. I'm going to use the Attachment option. The Attachment option saves a copy of the XREF drawing in my drawing. The Overlay option creates a link to the XREF drawing in my drawing. This means if I want to email this drawing to someone and I use the Attachment option, the XREF will be included. If I use the Overlay option, the XREF will not be included. I'm going to accept all the defaults for insertion. I don't want to change the scale. I want the drawing to insert at the origin so that it aligns properly with the host drawing. I don't want to rotate the attachment or it won't place properly in the host drawing. I click OK. The XREF is placed in the drawing. I get a dialog pop-up telling me that I have unreconciled layers. Unreconciled layers are layers that have been added to the drawing or to attached XREFs since the layer list was last evaluated. AutoCAD is basically warning me that layers are being added to the drawing that I may want to review. I can click on the link to bring up the Layers Properties Manager. At the bottom of the dialog, I am informed that 19 layers were added to my layer list when I attached the new external reference. To reconcile the layers, I just highlight them all, right-click, and select Reconcile Layer. I'm going to bind one of the XREFs in the drawing. The bind command converts the XREF to a block and brings in all the layers for that external reference. I highlight Factory Lighting-M. I right-click and select Bind. I select the Bind option and click OK. I close the XREF dialog. When I hover over that external reference, it now displays as a block reference on layer 0. When I look at the layer drop-down list, I see that the layers for the XREF I just did the bind with no longer have a bar symbol. Now they have a $0 added to the layer name. As I go down the layer list, I see a layer for the XREF I just inserted had layers for windows and walls. I want to combine those layers with the host drawing using the Merge tool. In order to merge, I need to isolate the objects using those layers. I can use a Layer Properties filter to isolate those objects. I open the Layer Properties Manager. I highlight all, right-click, and select New Properties Filter. For the filter name, I type Windows and Walls. The layers are listed in the lower panel with those properties. I click OK. I close the Layer Properties Manager. Now only the layers in the property filter are listed in the drop-down list on the Home tab. I select the layer Merge tool located on the extended area of the Layers panel on the Home tab. I right-click and select Name. I scroll down and select the Factory Lighting $0 walls from the list. I click OK. I click Enter to complete my selection. I select one of the interior walls in the display window, and AutoCAD prompts me if I want to continue. I select Yes. The XREF layer is deleted. I go up to the layer list. The layer used by the XREF for walls is no longer on the list. The devices in my electric XREF are a dark blue that is difficult to see. I can modify the color without changing it in the external file. I open the Layer Properties Manager. I locate the Devices layer. I change the color to yellow. The layer updates to show the new color. I'm going to open up the external reference so that you can see that the layer colors in the external reference file remain the same. I select the XREF. I right-click and select Open XREF. In the external file, the devices are still blue. Managing layers and the display of external references is pretty easy once you learn some of the tools. Using property filters to help you locate elements on layers, using layer merge to combine layers, and changing the properties of external references can make managing your drawings a breeze. In this lesson, I'm going to attach a PDF file as an underlay. I'm going to use the Hatch tool to place a hatch on top of the underlay. The Hatch command in AutoCAD is used to fill an area of selected objects with a hatch pattern or fill. The hatches represent materials to be used and incorporated within a design. Hatches can also be used to designate areas or room types. I'm going to modify the boundary of the hatch and then associate the hatch to the new boundary. I start with a new drawing. I have defined a few layers to start my drawing to help me organize my objects. I have the Underlay Layer Current. I select the Insert tab on the ribbon. I select the Attach tool. I select PDF under Files of Type. I select 6-2A underlay.pdf as the file to attach. I click Open. I insert the PDF at the origin. I set the scale to 128. I click OK. I switch to the Home tab on the ribbon. I switch to the boundary layer using the layer drop-down list. I select the Polyline tool located on the Draw panel. I'm going to draw the boundary for my hatch. I want to indicate where bike lane striping needs to be placed for a subcontractor. I use the Polyline tool to draw the boundary. I can snap to the outline of the PDF to complete my boundary. I can use the Trim tool to clean up any overextending lines or use multi-grips to remove any unnecessary vertices. It takes a few minutes to create the polyline that I'm going to use as the boundary for my hatch. Once my boundary is placed, I can add the hatch. I switch to the hatch layer using the layer drop-down list on the Layers panel. I select the Hatch tool from the Draw panel on the ribbon. I'm going to expand the Boundaries panel on the Hatch Creation tab. I'm going to select Retain Boundaries Polyline. This option will automatically create a boundary around my hatch and associate the hatch to the boundary. I select the ANSI 31 hatch pattern. I click inside the polyline area I just drew to place the hatch. The hatch is previewed. I right-click and select Settings. A hatch dialog opens. Notice by default the hatch is placed behind the boundary. Retain Boundaries is enabled. The boundary to be created will be a polyline. I change the scale of the hatch to 25. I click OK to close the dialog. I press Enter to accept the hatch. I hover over the hatch and you see a polyline was placed on the hatch layer. This is the boundary that was created with the hatch. I select the boundary. I right-click and select Properties. I can see how much square footage is being taken up by the bike lane. I freeze the layer where I place the original polyline used to create my hatch. I select the Offset tool from the Modify panel. I set my offset distance to 2 inches. I select the hatch boundary and offset the boundary 2 inches inside my hatch. I want to reassociate the hatch to the new offset boundary. I select the hatch. I right-click and select Set Boundary. I select the inside polyline, which was offset as the new boundary. I click Enter. Autocad prompts me if I want to erase the selected boundary. I select No by clicking Enter. The hatch is associated to a new boundary. In this lesson, I inserted a PDF to use as an underlay. I created a boundary for hatch using the Polyline tool. I placed a hatch and used one of the hatch options to automatically create a boundary with a hatch. I used the Offset tool to create a new boundary for the hatch and then reassociated the hatch to the new boundary. In this lesson, I'm going to save a drawing as a PDF. AutoCAD allows you to export objects in a drawing to DWF, SAT, STL, BMP, IGS, EPS, or DGN formats. SAT and IGS formats are used in 3D CAD software. The STL format is used for 3D printing. The EPS format is used in Adobe Illustrator. BMP is used by image software. DGN files are used by MicroStation. I also am going to add a callout to a view in a drawing so I can insert a hyperlink. To create the callout, I'm going to use the Polyline tool. I'm also going to use the tool palette to access a callout block to be added to the view. I can then add a hyperlink so that when you click on the callout, you go to the PDF file. AutoCAD hyperlinks can be used to link to a web page, another drawing, a named view, a layout tab, or to an external file. Keep in mind that if the target of the hyperlink is moved or deleted, the hyperlink won't work anymore. We're going to start by saving a drawing to a PDF. This file has all the door and window details used in a project. Because the same details are often used for more than one project, this drawing is an excellent candidate for a hyperlink. I switch to the Output tab on the ribbon. I select Export PDF. I browse to where I want to save the file and click Save. I can use the tabs on the top of my display window to quickly switch between drawings. I switch to the elevation drawing. I'm going to start by placing a rectangle to define a callout for the door. I switch to the Home tab on the ribbon. I select the rectangle tool from the Draw panel on the ribbon. I right-click and select Fillet. I enter 100 for the radius value of the fillet. I then place my rectangle. This creates a rectangle with the corners already filleted. The rectangle tool will now retain that fillet option with the radius value until it's been changed. I type Tool Palettes to launch the tool palette. I'm going to place a call-out bubble from the tool palette. To place the call-out, I just drag and drop it to the right of the rectangle I drew. Then I'm going to add a polyline to connect the call-out rectangle to the call-out bubble. I set Ortho on the status bar. I type PL for polyline. I select the midpoint of the rectangle as the start point. I move my cursor to the right and click to place the endpoint. I use the Move tool to adjust the position of the callout so it is connected to the horizontal polyline. I select the Move tool from the Modify panel on the ribbon. I select the callout bubble and press Enter. I select the west quadrant of the bubble as the base point and the endpoint of the polyline as the new location. I want to add a hyperlink to the PDF I just created. I type Hyperlink. I select the callout bubble. I click Enter. I type Door Detail in the Text to Display field. I click the Browse for File button on the dialog box. The PDF file I just created is located in this PDF folder. I select the file and press Open. I click OK to close the dialog box. When I hover over the callout, it shows a link to the PDF. I click Control and left click to go to that link, and voila, the PDF opens. Hyperlinks are easy to insert and even easier to use. Hyperlinks are an easy way to connect across drawings and make information easier to access. Use the Export function inside of Autocad to save your drawing objects as PDF, DWIF, BMP, SAT, IGS, or DGN files. Have you ever found yourself repeatedly selecting the same set of objects for copying, moving, or some other operation? With the Group command, you simply select the objects that you want to associate together and press Enter. Then when you select any object in the group, all of the grouped objects are selected. I have a switch on my power strip that is too small. I can use the Scale command to resize this object so it is the correct size. The Autocad Scale tool allows you to use the Reference option to determine the scale factor. I select the Scale tool from the Modify panel on the ribbon, or I can just type SC to start the Scale command. I select the switch object and press Enter to complete my selection. Then I select the lower left corner of the switch as my base point. I right-click to use the Reference option. Next, I need to define the reference distance. This is the current distance of the object to be scaled. I select the lower left corner as the start of my reference distance and the lower right corner as the end of my reference distance. If you look on the command prompt, you'll see what information Autocad needs to specify a new length. I select the endpoint of the rectangle for the new length. The switch is resized and it now fits perfectly in the rectangle. Now I'm ready to create a group using the elements defining the outlets. This ensures that the elements for each outlet stay together. The Group tool is located on the Groups panel on the Home ribbon. To create a group, I select the Group tool. I right-click and select Description. I type in Outlet. I window around the outlet to select the elements to be part of the group. I accidentally select some elements I didn't want to include in my selection. To remove objects from the selection set, I can type R for remove or hold down the Shift key while I select the elements to remove. I type R and select one of the elements to be removed. Notice on the command prompt, AutoCAD displays that one object has been removed from the selection set. If I want to switch back to Add mode to add to the selection set, I type A. Notice how the prompt has changed to display Select Objects. This time, I'll hold down the Shift key and select the remaining elements to be removed. I'm going to purposely exclude some elements from my group so you can see how groups can be modified. I press Enter to complete the group definition. Now when I hover over the group, the entire group highlights. I want to look at my groups in my Group Manager. The Group Manager tool is located in the lower expanded area on the Groups panel of the Home ribbon. My group doesn't have a name because it was created with the Group command instead of using the Group Manager. I place a check to enable Include Unnamed Groups. The group is listed. AutoCAD assigned the name A1 to the group. I highlight the group name and change the name to Outlet. I press Rename. Notice that the name updates in the group name list. I select the Add button to add the missing elements to my group. Notice that the existing group elements highlight to show me which elements are already part of the group. I window around the missing elements. I press OK. Now when I hover over the group, all the elements highlight. I'm going to array my group to place more outlets in my power strip. I select the Rectangular Array tool from my ribbon. I select the group and press Enter. Notice that I just needed to select any member of the group to select every element that is part of the group. I see a preview of the array. I change the number of rows to 1. I need to adjust the spacing between columns. I select Spacing from the command prompt. I select a start and end point in my drawing to designate the distance between columns. I change the number of columns to 7 to ensure all the outlets are placed. I enable Associative on the ribbon to keep all the outlets as part of the array and select Close Array. I want to replace the outlet group with a different outlet style. I switch to the Insert ribbon. I select the Singapore outlet from the block list and place it in the drawing. I select the array and all the members of the array highlight. I select Replace Item on the ribbon. I select the block to be used as the replacement item. AutoCAD prompts me for a base point. I press Enter to use the centroid of the block. AutoCAD prompts me to select an item in the array to be replaced. I select one of the outlet groups. Notice only the groups I select are replaced. I press Enter. I exit the command.